So the first step is to take 1 cup of almond flour, and I'm going to send you guys these recipes in the chat. So the first step is to take a cup of almond flour and then 1/4 cup and 2 tablespoons of coconut flour and mix that together. So just whip it up just to kind of get any kinks out of it. If you do have a food processor, you can put it in there and mix that up. And then the next step is to cut in 1/4 cup of really cold vegan butter. And if you're not vegan, you can use regular butter, but for the purpose of this today, it'll be vegan. And so I just cut that in. I use the food processor because it's super fast, but if you have a pastry cutter, you can just kind of like cut that in until you have pea-sized chunks. And then some salt, and then I streamed in a vegan buttermilk. So to make a buttermilk, it's lemon juice and almond milk or any other kind of plant-based milk that you kind of just stream in there as you're whisking together your dough, and then eventually you start to get that coming together, and then you have a vegan and grain-free pie dough. And so I'm just going to demo rolling this out and then placing it into a baking dish. So this baking dish is greased, so I greased it with coconut oil. And I like to use coconut oil because, it's a, low inflammatory oil. It's good at high heats, and I like the taste of it. It's nice and nutty. But you could also use like a little bit of olive oil or some more of that vegan butter to grease the pie dish. And so I'm just going to show you guys rolling out this dough. So I took 2 pieces of parchment paper, as you can see, and then I'm just going to put this between the 2 pieces. Because when you're working with any kind of vegan or grain-free pastry dough, it's going to be really sticky, and it's not going to work the same way that like a glutinous dough works when you add that white flour. So I'm just going to roll this out really thin. The parchment paper just keeps it from sticking on my rolling pin. And you can also use wax paper or really anything that'll separate this for you. Learning to work with gluten-free dough is definitely an art, but it can, you can make it tasty. And I'm going to provide this recipe for you guys. And like I said, it's just a little bit of a break from eating any kind of like refined flours, glutinous flours, especially if you're celiac or you have any kinds of gluten intolerance. That can be great as well. So I'm just going to check this. So it's a nice, I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. So basically the goal of this is that you want to get it to about the circumference of your pie dish. So you want it to be about the same size. And then place that aside. And then I'm actually going to save this because we're going to use this again later for the flatbread that we're making, that cassava flour. And then what I do is I just take my pie dish and I place it right on top, so perfectly even, and then slide this off and get my hand underneath it and push it in, flip over the pie dish. It's not perfect, but we're going to even it out, just kind of pressing it in.
Thank you for showing that, Mary. Every time I've tried, it's completely collapsed before I got to this point.
It's impossible. I've tried, I finally figured this out like maybe a year ago.
Yeah, that's awesome.
A lifesaver. And so you can see it's pretty cracked. So gluten-free and grain-free doughs are not perfect. They can be really hard to work with. So it's kind of just, making sure that they fit into the pie dish. And then also you're going to gather anything around the sides and just put it off to the side. And we're going to use that to fill in. Because luckily, when you're making a pie, you're not going to really see how beautiful or not so beautiful this pie crust looks. But it's going to taste really good. So I just press it into the sides. I'm going to take the sides off a little bit and just press that down. And then just fill it in. So you want it to feel even under your hands. You don't want there to be any weak spots. So you can see here is like a little bit of a weak spot. So I'm just going to take a little piece of dough and fill that in. Just press it in there. And for anyone who's used to making pies and is used to like that really like flaky, easy to work with pie dough that's just like super elastic, this is going to be different. But it's just a matter of getting it evenly in, and then you're good to go. So I'm just going to press that in. And then I usually just start to rotate the pan and just kind of press down the sides and then fill in as needed. So the one good thing about this dough is it's really malleable, so you can kind of shape it as you want. And so the reason that I'm doing this first is because this has to be in the refrigerator for about 30 minutes before you bake it. It just kind of helps the whole thing come together and bake really nice and crispy. So I'm going to put this in the fridge for 30 minutes after I finish this. And so that's just a good thing to plan ahead whenever you're baking something like this. So when you have a vegan dough or, basically a grain-free dough, you are going to want to put that in the fridge to just pull it together before baking. So you can make it look nice. It's going to be pretty much covered. And so then this is the final product. So that's your grain-free dough and vegan. And so then I'm actually also going to just grab a fork and poke some holes in this. I forgot my fork. So you're just going to make a couple holes just to let any air out while it's cooking. And so then you're going to take this and just pop it in the fridge for the next 30 minutes. All right, so I'm just going to clear up my space. So that was that dough. And now, so while that's in the refrigerator for the next 30 minutes, we are going to make the butternut squash curry. And so this is a really easy recipe. I love this recipe, and you can really swap in a lot of different ingredients. So if you have cauliflower, you can add it in. If you have really any vegetable that you want to throw in, like zucchini, carrots, anything, you can basically use this curry as a base. And I do have lentils in the recipe, so I'm using lentils because I find with a lot of the people that I cook for and with myself, and just generally that lentils and legumes are easier to digest than grains, and they also pack a big protein punch that is plant-based. And so what I did with the lentils is I soaked them overnight. And so I soaked these lentils, as you can see, they're a little bit, a little cloudy because all of the plant fiber and the lectins and the phytic acid is coming off of it. And so by soaking it in a little bit of warm water and lemon juice, it's basically breaking down the external surface. It's an enzyme inhibitor. So basically what that means is that when you eat legumes and you don't soak them, they can inhibit the absorption of other minerals in the food that you're eating. So like things like magnesium, iron, things like that, zinc, and then it also can irritate the GI tract. So by soaking it, you really remove that irritant, and they become a lot easier to digest and absorb all the vitamins and minerals that you're eating as well. But they're totally, you can totally omit them. So here is my pan, or my pot. So, oh, my gas actually worked today, so I don't have to light it. And so first I'm just going to start by heating this pot. So that's step one in most recipes. Hey, Nikki. I see you in the chat. So I'm just heating my pot, and then I'm going to add about a tablespoon of olive oil. So I like to use light olive oil. You can use extra virgin. You can use coconut oil, avocado oil. These are all really healthy fats. I generally tend to avoid canola, sunflower, safflower oil, all of those ones because they're a little bit higher in the polyunsaturated fats, which can also be an irritant to the GI tract and just increase the inflammation load in the body. So healthy fats tend to be more like coconut oil, olive oil, avocado oil are probably my three favorites to use. So I'm just heating this up. And then the first step, I took a whole onion, so a yellow onion, and I just diced it. So a medium dice. It can be kind of thick because it's going to cook down quite a bit. And so I'm just going to add this into my pot now that it's warmed up. So I'm just going to get these coated in the oil. And so if if you can tolerate onions, you know, if that's in your diet, you know, once they're cooked, they're very easy to digest. Even for people who have things like acid reflux, onions, you know, when they're cooked are a good option and a really good base for anything that you're making. So like soups, stews, you know, they're really flavorful. So I usually start pretty much almost anything that I make with onions. I'm also Italian, so I think onions and garlic for most of my meals. So here, I'm gonna put this back down. So as you can see, they're just starting to, you know, I'm just cooking them. I'm gonna cook them until they become translucent. So about like 3 to 5 minutes. And then I'm also gonna get my other ingredients prepared. So I have everything already cut, but if I didn't, at this point, I would be probably cutting up my garlic. So just taking about a half inch piece of of ginger. So taking about a half-inch piece of ginger and then peeling it. So it's really easy to peel ginger when you use a spoon because it's a dull edge. So it's not going to cut out the, you know, the good part of the body. It's just going to kind of scrape off the flesh. And so I take ginger, just kind of use a spoon, kind of just take off the skin, and then just chop it up. So mince it. Or if you have a ginger grater, you can, you know, use your ginger grater and just grate that down. And so then here I have a 1-inch piece of ginger that has been minced. And I also have a clove of garlic that I'm going to throw in there that I minced. You can add as much garlic to this as you want, depending on how much you like it. Again, some people who have acid reflux have trouble with garlic. So sometimes, you know, if I'm cooking for someone who has that, I would omit it. But if you're, you know, good with garlic, it definitely makes it taste really good. So the onions are going. Over here, I also have some spices. So I have turmeric. And then I have salt, cayenne pepper, garlic pepper, and a little bit of black pepper. So those are all the spices that I'm going to use. And then I also have a bay leaf because bay leaves are just tasty in general. I add them to a lot of things. But they're also really great when you are cooking with legumes. So when you're cooking beans or lentils, because they actually help to break down the legume. And they tend to have like a gas reducing property. So, you know, not super good to talk about when you're cooking, but it's really great to throw in a bay leaf or any kind of seaweed, like kombu seaweed is really great if you're making more of like an Asian soup or, you know, more of those flavors, because it tends to help break down those gas producing properties of the beans. So here is my pot. So I'm just sauteing this up. As you can see, they're starting to get translucent. They could go a little bit longer, but for the sake of time, I'm going to add in the ginger and garlic now. And so with this, I'm just going to cook it until it's fragrant. And the reason that I add these after the onions is because they have a much shorter cooking time. And so if you add them before or with the onions, they'll tend to burn before your onions have even cooked. So this is my base. So I'm starting to smell the ginger and the garlic wafting. And now I'm going to take the butternut squash. So this is butternut squash. It's about 3 cups of cubed butternut squash. They're about like half an inch or 3/4 of an inch size. So it's basically just when you cut the squash, you just want to say like what size would I want to bite into, because it's going to be in a curry. It's going to, you know, it's going to cook down, but you don't want like giant pieces of squash in your curry. You know, when you're making a butternut squash soup or something like that you're going to blend, it really doesn't matter what size your vegetables are. But if you're making anything like this, where you're going to, you know, be eating the vegetables whole, you want to just think about, you know, what would be appetizing to bite into. So now I'm going to take this and add it to my pot. I'm going to take my spices and add that as well, because it's helpful if they can bloom in the oil. So you want to get them in there with the oil. I think in Indian cooking, they, you know, they'll take like an entire day to make their curry, and they'll actually I'll let the spices cook in the oil for hours just to really bloom them. So that's basically just the act of releasing all of the properties from the spices into the oil, and then it's carried throughout the dish. As you can see, it's getting nice and yellow. So that's that turmeric. Turmeric is my favorite spice. It's really, has antioxidant properties, anti-inflammatory. But you do want to make sure that you eat it with pepper, because without black pepper, your body just can't access the properties that are in turmeric. Yeah, so if you ever see like a turmeric supplement or a curcumin supplement, you want to make sure that there's at least black pepper or like a black pepper oil in with it that will help, release that and make it easier to digest. So I'm just cooking everything together. Once again, if you had cauliflower, oh, I see a question. So I'm cooking on a medium to low heat. So pretty, here, I'll show you. So not high at all, pretty low actually. So yeah, so I would say medium to low. And so after about like 2 minutes of sauteing all of your ingredients, so you could throw in cauliflower here, carrots, zucchini, anything that you have in the fridge basically that you think will taste good with this. You can also adjust the seasonings based on what vegetables you have. So you might want something a little bit more Italian if you had like zucchini and carrots. So yeah. And then we're going to take diced tomatoes. So I have a can of diced tomatoes. This is Moor Glen, so that's an organic tomato brand. And I'm just going to pop this entire can of tomatoes in here. Just stir that around. And then I also have a can of coconut milk. And I like this brand that says simple because it has no fillers in it. So the only ingredients are coconut milk and filtered water, which I think is really great because a lot of times, pretty much every other coconut brand has guar gum or xanthan gum in it, which is, it's not bad if you're eating it once in a while, but for anyone that's having digestive problems, you do want to try to stay away from any kinds of added ingredients or fillers, because that's just another opportunity to kind of react to something or further irritate the GI tract. So that's going in here. The one thing with this, though, when you don't have that guar gum or that xanthan gum, is, as you can probably see, it's really chunky because that's basically like an emulsifier and a thickener. So when you have that, it makes the coconut milk, the fat, and the water completely, emulsify. But when you don't have that filler in there, it's going to separate. So you have the water and then the fat on top. So you just have to give that a little bit to melt. And then I'm going to add a little more pepper. So at the end of this, you'll taste it. And so the salt and pepper will all be to taste. And I'm also going to pop in my bay leaf. So put that in there. And then I'm going to take my, see if you can see this. I'm going to take my lentils and I'm just going to rinse off all of that phytic acid, all the lectins that have been released into the water while they cook. And so these are red lentils, but you can really use any kind of lentil. It doesn't matter.
Mary, when you were soaking the lentils, they were just in cold water?
Yeah, so I put them in warm water and a touch of acid, so lemon juice.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, so lemon juice kind of like catalyzes that chemical process of breaking it down. But it's not necessary. It's just kind of like an added measure.
And does it have to be fresh lemon juice or did you use concentrate from a bottle?
I use fresh, but it doesn't matter. It's basically just the acid property that you want. So you could use apple cider vinegar, white vinegar, just lemon juice from a bottle, lime juice. Really anything that's really acidic basically will help break that down. And it's just like a touch, maybe like a teaspoon. So this So this is a half cup of dried lentils. And so I just covered it with warm water and then I added maybe like a half teaspoon of lemon juice. So not very much.
And how long did they soak for?
I soaked these overnight, but you can do anywhere, like basically you want to do at least 8 hours. So 8 hours really helps break them down. Overnight is best because the longer that they're sitting within that 24-hour period, the better. But beyond that, they can start to ferment. So basically anywhere from like 8 to 24 hours is a good soaking time. So is my pot again. So here's everything together, and I'm just gonna put this on high heat now. So just kind of crank it up. And then I wanna bring this to a boil, and then I'm gonna simmer it. So it's gonna simmer for about 30 minutes. And so if you had more butternut squash, more vegetables, and for some reason the liquid was not mostly covering the vegetables, then you could always add a tiny bit of water, broth, like any kind of broth, so vegetable broth or chicken broth. Basically, you just want to make sure that your vegetables are mostly covered because that just helps to cook them. Because if you have vegetables that are sitting above the surface, they're not going to cook evenly. So that's going to come up to a boil. And while that happens, we're going to move on to filling for the apple crumble pie. So if anyone has any questions about the squash, you can go ahead. Otherwise, I'll just move on to the pie. So for this filling, so basically it's going to be that crust that we just put in the fridge, and then it's going to have an apple filling and then a crumble top. So I'll go over the filling and the top now. And so the filling is going to start with a mixture of coconut oil and then a starch. So I'm using a tiny bit of arrowroot. So just about a tablespoon. And so, for most people, this is tolerated because arrowroot, it comes from a plant that isn't, people don't oftentimes have an allergy to it, like the same way that they might have an allergy to cornstarch, because cornstarch is such like a common ingredient in everything in our diet and our society. So oftentimes people will react to cornstarch, but they won't to arrowroot. That being said, it's not a necessary step. It just kind of makes that filling a little bit kind of like gooier and just a little bit thicker. So it's not, so it's just, a little bit more together. So in doing that, I put some coconut oil in here, and it has melted because my kitchen is really cold. So I'm just gonna melt it a tiny bit. But when you use any kind of starch or arrowroot, you wanna make sure that you're not adding it to a hot mixture. Otherwise, it'll just completely, stick together and you won't be able to break it down. So I'm just gonna like gently heat this just to break it up and melt it. So you might be able to see it's just a tiny bit of heat. And now I'm going to add 1 tablespoon of arrowroot starch. And then I'm taking this off the heat for a second because you don't want to add that to the starch. And so I'm just going to whisk this up. So it's going to create kind of like a paste. That's what that looks like. It's kind of just like a cloudy coconut oil starch mixture. And so then to this, I'm going to add all of the filling ingredients. So I have them all measured out here. So I have some coconut sugar. So coconut sugar is a lower glycemic sugar option, and it's more of a whole form than white sugar. So usually, you'll avoid that like glycemic spike when you eat coconut sugar, and also it's just a lot better for the digestive system to avoid anything that's like totally stripped of all of its nutrients. And so coconut sugar, as you can tell by the color, still has all of those nutrients intact. So I'm going to add this to this mixture. And then I'm also going to add some spices. So here I have cinnamon, nutmeg, allspice, ground sugar, and just a little bit of salt, like a sprinkle. You can use any spices you want here. Like if you didn't like any of those, you can omit them. Cinnamon, I definitely recommend just for this recipe. But all the other ones are, you can play with the quantities on that. So I'm just going to add this into here as well. And then at the same time, you can see that the squash, the curry is starting to boil. So I'm going to reduce the heat down to a simmer. And then this will cook for 30 minutes. And I'm just gonna leave the lid, you know, partially ajar, so just so some of the liquid can evaporate, because you want it to be like nice and not so liquidy. You want it to be thick when it's a curry. And so so I just added the spices to this, and I'm also gonna add some maple syrup. And so that was maple syrup and actually a little bit of vanilla as well. So that was a little mixture. So you're just gonna add them all together. And then now I'm gonna bring this over the heat. So now that the starch has totally mixed in, I'm gonna start to heat this. And so as I start to heat this, it's gonna get really, really like sticky because that starch is in there. So you don't want to overmix it. You basically want it to become viscous, but not like, you know, like you're moving through jelly. So you want to kind of find like a nice medium. So I don't know if you guys can see this, but it's just a little bit resistant. Like it's not totally liquid, but it's not too sticky. So I'm going to take it off right now. And so now I have this mixture, and then I'm going to grab my apples. So this is about 5 different apples. So I used a mixture of Granny Smith and Honeycrisp, but you can use really any kind of apple that's really crunchy and has that nice crunch to it. And so I just thinly sliced them into like 1/4-inch slices, popped it in a bowl with some lemon juice. So I put 2 tablespoons of lemon juice over this just to keep it from browning in the time before this class. But you could also just kind of throw that lemon juice in with the whole mixture that you just made. Now I'm going to take this mixture and pour it over this. So as you can see, it's like really, it's almost like a caramel sauce. And even if you didn't use that arrowroot, it would still be absolutely delicious. It would just be a little bit less thick. It smells really good. I wish you guys could smell this right now. It smells like Thanksgiving.
Mm.
All right, so that is going in the sink. And so now just with this whole mixture, I'm just going to mix it up and evenly coat the apples.
I never heard of coconut sugar.
Mm.
And is it brown? Because I mean, coconut is white on the inside.
Right. Yeah, I don't know exactly where they get it from. I think it actually might come from the tree because there's a sap from the tree. So if you ever
Cooking class
there is like
in the library.
so my inclination is that it probably comes from the tree, and then they I think they dry it out to get the granulated form. So it's kind of like in like a
Apple crisp.
Is it as strong a sugar as cane sugar?
Definitely not. So it has a very earthy flavor to it. It's not going to be like that pure sweet on your tongue. It's going to be like a little bit more, like a little more robust, like almost like a molasses flavor, but less intense.
Okay.
So like a sweet molasses, I would say. It's pretty similar to maple syrup, but it's a good option. There's also maple crystals, but it's good when you have a recipe that calls for granulated sugar rather than like that, you know, liquid sugar like maple syrup or honey or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so when you want to sub something for white sugar, you can use this or you can use maple crystals.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So now I have this. And so since my crust is still in the fridge, I'm going to make that crumble topping. So this is really easy. It's just going to be in a bowl. I'm just going to take some more almond flour, so completely bleached and fine almond flour.
Mm-hmm.
Add that. And then some coconut flour, again, same as the crust. And then here are some coconut flakes, just for a little bit of texture. And some chopped pecans. You can use any nut, though.
Those are unsweetened coconut flakes?
Yes, unsweetened. So I'm going to mix that together, and then I have 2 liquids I'm going to add. So here's a time when you wouldn't want to use a granulated sugar. You would want to use a maple syrup or a honey. to get that nice crumble texture. So I have coconut oil. I'm gonna add that. And then I have maple syrup. I also recommend whenever you're making a dessert, just kind of testing things as you go to make sure that they're not too sweet. Because oftentimes recipes can kind of overdo it on the sugar side of things. So I always like to, add half the sugar and then taste it, and then, add the rest or add as much as I want, and then go from there.
Good idea.
Yeah. So here is the crumble topping. So this one's a little bit wet. It's gonna get nice and crispy in the oven. If it ever, if you were pooling any kind of, if you poured in too much coconut oil or maple syrup, you could always just toss in a little more almond flour, coconut flour, just one of the dry ingredients to kind of dry that up a little bit. So now I have the filling and the crumble topping. I'm gonna go grab the crust. So I'm kind of breaking my rule. It hasn't been in there for 30 minutes, but it's pretty hard and it's in good shape. So now I can kind of just move the crust around a little bit, just kind of shape it up a little bit. And now I'm going to add my apples.
When I make a pie crust, I usually put it in the freezer rather than the fridge.
Oh, that's a good idea. That would have been a better option, especially now for a time constraint. You can also freeze this crust. So if you are going to freeze it and use it at another date, I would recommend baking it first for 10 minutes. Sometimes when you freeze almond flour, it kind of gets a little bit, if you freeze it over time, over a couple days or a month, it can tend to get a little bit mushy in the freezer.
That looks delicious.
It really smells delicious. I'm going to eat an apple and let you guys know how it is. It's really good. And so now, just make it look nice. You can also brush the sides with butter if you want it to be get a little bit more golden. That's always an option. And then I'm just going to take that crumb topping and spoon it over or finger it over. I use my hands a lot when I'm at home, but less so when I cook for people. All right, so that is what that looks like. And so I'm going to pop that in the oven. And so this is going to cook so I have my oven preheated to 425. And so this is going to cook for 15 minutes. And then I'm going to reduce that temperature to 350 and cook it for about 35 to 45 minutes. So you guys won't see the end result, but it'll just look like this. And then it'll be a little bit browner and crispier on top and all around on the bottom. I'm also just really quick going to show you how to make a pie, a little lid for the size of the pie, if you don't have a pie cover. Basically, you just take a piece of tin foil that's the size of the pie dish, and then just fold it in half. And then again. And then I'm just going to cut out a big part of the center. So. Just cut that out, and then you have this, and then you can kind of just shape it around your crust. So you're going to want to put that on about 15 to 20 minutes into cooking so that that crust doesn't get too brown.
So my oven is an induction oven.
Okay.
So I So do I still do it for 15 minutes at 425? Because it seems to cook everything so much faster.
Right, so for that, I forget the conversion. I think that you want to take it down by 50 degrees. So that's right. So I think you would take it down to 375. So instead of 425, you would do 375. And then, so cook that at 375 for 15 minutes. And then probably bring it all the way down to 325, probably 325, and cook it for the rest of the 30 minutes. And then that would be something to play with. Yeah, if it ended up being a little bit too brown, you just pull it out a little bit early, or lower the
Okay.
temperature even down to 300.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course. And so the final thing that we're doing as everything is cooking is making the cassava flatbread. So this is the cassava flour that I like to use. It's my favorite. It's Otto's. Otto's is the brand. I find that it's like one of the less starchy brands. And so the reason I like to use this is because it's grain-free. It's really easy to digest. It is a little bit of a higher carbohydrate, probably the highest carbohydrate thing that we're going to make in this whole demo. So, you know, if you have any issues with that, like if you have trouble with blood sugar, then it's definitely good to eat it with a fat, a protein. So that's why it's good paired with this. You know, I definitely wouldn't suggest eating it by itself if you have any kind of blood sugar problems. But I do like it because it's grain-free, it's gluten-free, and it tastes really good, especially in this kind of recipe. So to make it, I have cassava flour, and then I have some sea salt in here, and garlic powder, and some garlic that I minced, so fresh garlic. So that's all mixed together in here already. And now I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of olive oil, so a good amount of olive oil. And then mix that all together. So really try to coat it. This is going to be like a slightly messy process. It always is. And then I also have some warm water here. So I'm just going to stream in some warm water. And it's kind of an experiment every time. You just want to make sure that the dough isn't too dry, but also that it's not too wet and sticky. So I have a recipe here that I'll send out. But it's sometimes you do have to play with it a little bit. So then once it starts to come together, you can start to use your hands and form it into a dough. So I usually just kind of shape it against the side of the bowl. Really incorporating all of that dry cassava, making sure it gets incorporated with the wet ingredients. And then slowly it's ready to pick up. And add a little bit more water. So now it's starting to come into a ball. So as you can see, it's nice and smooth, but it's not sticky at all. So it's, you know, a nice ball of dough. And then I'm going to cut this in half because one will be used for each tortilla or each bread. This also does make a really good tortilla if you're making Mexican food. It's a really good alternative to any corn products or anything else that you might use. And then I'm going to do the same thing with this and roll it out like I did with the pie crust. So I'm just adding
Parchment paper.
Yeah, with the parchment. Mm-hmm. All right, so that's ready to go. over so it's not on the pie side. And then this is really drier than usual, so I'm just adding a little water. Like I said, you really have to play with it. I think that it kind of depends on the day. Like on a summer, like a humid summer day, this would be good to go, but I think it needs a little more water actually. And you'll feel that the second that you put it down and it starts to crumble, you know to add a little bit of water. All right, here we go. Now we're in business. Just form it into a nice sized ball. Press it between your hands a little bit first just to flatten that out. As you can see now, it's not cracking in the middle like before when I knew it needed more flour. It was really cracking and kind of falling apart, which is not going to bake very well or not going to fry very well. And so while I do this, just really quick, I'm going to heat up some oil in this pan. I add about a tablespoon of oil. And then meanwhile, I'm going to roll this out. So you want it to be pretty thick. It's not going to be like the pie crust. You can also add fresh herbs to this if you wanted to add like some parsley or anything like that. So that's pretty good. Yeah. And then I'm just going to kind of put that together. As you can see, whenever you're not cooking with gluten, you really have to like kind of form things with your hands. So that's just something that that kind of goes along with the gluten-free recipes. So that's looking good. And now I'm just waiting for my oil to get pretty hot because I'm basically, you know, I want to sear this. I want it to get nice and brown on both sides. So I'm going to do that. And then, what time is it? And then that is all. So I'll show you guys the end product. But if anyone has any questions, I'll answer them now. And yeah, thanks for watching.